Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 197, Giovanni of the Black Bands, Part 2, The Invincible Very Naughty Boy, 1518 to 1521.
Colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
We last left off with Giovanni de Medici, known as Giovanni of the Black Bands, having risen to mercenary captain stardom, thanks also to the fact that there was a Medici Pope on St. Peter's throne, Leo X. Giovanni had managed to stay home enough from fighting and womanizing to get his wife pregnant and have their first and only child called Cosimo. Although Giovanni's mercenary company was not yet known as the Black Bands, a name they would take after the death of Pope Leo in 1521, they were already well known and many young men wanted to join. They were quite happy to face the risk in exchange for escaping the boring and difficult life of a farmer in search of glory and booty. Indeed, in the Black Bands, you were more likely to get a big share of the spoils, as Giovanni himself did not participate in the division, relying on payment from those who hired him. Payment which, unfortunately for him and his family, didn't always materialize. You will remember that these mercenary captains were known in Italian as condottieri, meaning leaders, but also coming from the word condotta, which was the actual contract that was stipulated with the client and included a whole series of clauses, also for baggage trains, logistics, and weapons hire. The company would generally have to wait at least 6 months before taking on a different contract and at least 24 months before fighting against their previous employer. At times, there were no employers to be had, so some captains would set up a sort of protection racket, asking for pay from certain nobles or cities to protect them, which basically meant protecting them from being attacked by the company itself. Basically, a good old bit of extortion. Some mercenary captains also used their moments of peace to try and sort out their immortal soul by investing in church building and philanthropic projects with the blood money they earned. If you weren't the captain but just one of the soldiers, as well as the loot from a victory, you could also expect to receive pay, although that pay would go forfeit if you got yourself in prison for a period of over 2 months. Getting into the Black Bands wasn't that easy, as you had to fight both against Giovanni himself and one of his existing captains, and, particularly at the beginning of their activity, they did not hesitate to kill a potential candidate. If you did manage to survive and get in, you could expect to live under strict discipline, being forced to keep yourself clean and presentable, and have your armor and weapons in order and matching those of the other soldiers, so that the Black Bands would always present an imposing image, in a time when you could find roving bands of mismatched improvised uniforms, and when the French came along, all sorts of colourful decorative plumage and so forth. Giovanni was having no trouble or funny business among the ranks. Once, when 2 of his captains got into an argument, he armed them both to the teeth and closed them in a room and told them that only one of them would come out alive. They battled it out for hours until some others among the captains convinced Giovanni to let them out of the room that was now seeped in blood. From that day on, the 2 arguing captains became the best of buddies. Giovanni would also often perform executions himself. If you behaved well, you could expect to be a part of a proud group of men who loved and respected their leader, who would sleep and eat with his men. When I say sleep with him, I mean actually sleep and not do other stuff. Training included a wide range of various weapons, both on foot and on horseback, and that included the new-fangled firearms, such as the arquebuses, long-barreled rifles that were often placed on a stand during battle. The traditional knights hated this weapon, which they perceived as cowardly. It could pierce through their armor, and indeed it is in the 15th and then the 16th centuries that the traditional knight on horseback in full armor started to disappear. Giovanni instead showed his adaptability by having specialized troops that could use arquebuses on horseback, often with a rider and a shooter behind him. This meant that the riders could come up to the enemy, shoot, and then quickly make a getaway, making them highly effective. Giovanni was totally loyal to his men, and saw any attack or affront to them as an affront to himself, and this is something that got him in trouble. For example, in 1518, a certain Camillo da Piano, brother of Giacomo, Signore of Piombino in Tuscany, had been responsible for his men beating on Corsetto, one of Giovanni's men. Giovanni challenged da Piano to a duel, and he accepted, although he tried to play for time. Da Piano sent 2 representatives to Florence to see if he couldn't sort out the situation with Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino and sort of Lord of Florence, cousin to Giovanni. The 2 emissaries stopped off in a tavern in Florence and got well into their drink and started making nasty comments about Giovanni. This very quickly reached him, and he rushed to confront the men and killed them, and then escaped from the city to go and hide out in Ferrara. Here he participated in his usual drinking, partying, and womanizing. In the end, Lorenzo de' Medici was, of course, forced to punish Giovanni, but he commuted his death sentence into a 5-year exile. Giovanni's man Corsetto was not so lucky and was put to death. This was yet another sign for the main branch of the Medici that Giovanni was in general nothing but trouble for them. He was allowed to spend his exile with his family in Trebbio to the delight of his wife Maria, but he soon got bored and so was very pleased when the Pope called him to Rome. All of the Medici were actually really pleased to see him leave Florence. Except, of course, for poor Maria, who was once again left alone to manage the meager family finances herself. Indeed, another reason that Giovanni meant trouble for the Medici was that he was continuously getting into debt and asking for his family to bail him out. He arrived in Rome just in time to get in another scrap with the Orsini family. The Pope had actually called Giovanni to sort out some issues with the naughty local lords and roving bands in the Papal States. The starting point was the city of Fermo in the Marche. Ludovico Eufreducci had taken over, and Giovanni's man was sent in with another 2 companies to sort him out. Medici was not too keen on sharing in the endeavor, and it seems he may have managed to have the other 2 companies misled by a fake guide, allowing the black bands to defeat Eufreducci on their own. It was Giovanni himself who killed the pesky lord, stabbing him with a lance and then riding up to the dying Eufreducci to watch the light go out of his eyes. He continued with some mop-up operations in the area and also found some time to get home to his wife for a bit. The couple wanted to have another child, but the second time was a miscarriage, and they would have no more after that. It was getting to the 1520s, and time once again for things to flare up in the Italian wars on the international stage. By this point, the Pope had switched to the side of Charles V against Francis I and supported the Emperor's attempt to take back the Duchy of Milan, which the French had been in possession of since 1515. Giovanni, for his campaign, was under the general command of Prospero Colonna, whom he respected as a military leader, but also as the man who had arrested Cesare Borgia, the man in turn who had put an end to the reign of Giovanni's mother, Caterina Sforza, and taken her to Rome as a prisoner in shame. There was also the added incentive of taking back the Duchy of Milan for his cousin Francesco II Sforza. We have mentioned that the main branch of the Medici were not too keen on being involved with Giovanni, but in this case he had an important sponsor who was also related by marriage, being the husband of another Salviati, as Maria was. The man in question was Francesco Guicciardini, an important Florentine politician and historian. Giovanni distinguished himself particularly in the Battle of Vaprio between the 13th and 14th of November 1521. The French were on the other side of the Adda River from the imperial troops, and the river was bloated and dangerous. Giovanni managed to find a ford, but had to make his way across on his beloved horse Sultano before anyone else was brave enough to try. Who knows if he was likely thinking of how his great-grandfather, Muzio Attendolo Sforza, had died in similar circumstances. He made it across and then raced back to get reinforcements. He had been spotted, however, by a man on the French side who raced to wake the main commander, Odette de Foix, Count of Lautrec. His attendants had strict orders not to wake him, and indeed did not. This gave the Imperials enough time to bring their troops across the river and win the Battle of Vaprio. They then managed to take Milan by sending a commando through the sewers to enter the city. Afterwards, it was Giovanni who particularly opposed the sack of Milan, and the High Commander, Prospero Colonna agreed, and the city was spared. It was shortly after this that Pope Leo X, another Giovanni de Medici, died. The black bands all decked out in black in mourning for the pontiff, and that is when the bands got their name. Sometime later, Giovanni was involved in mop-up and policing work around Cremona when he received the usual letter of complaint from his wife that this time also included another letter from Giovanni's stepsister Bianca Riario, daughter of Caterina Sforza and Girolamo Riario. Her second marriage had been to Troillo de' Rossi, the Marquis of the teeny-tiny marquisate of San Secondo Parmense, near Parma. It was actually part of the Duchy of Milan first and would later fall under that of Parma and Piacenza. Bianca's husband had died, leaving a young son, Pier Maria, under her regency. But two other members of the De Rossi had popped up to lay their claim, Filippo Maria and Bernardo de' Rossi, and taken the town, with Bianca Maria escaping to the castle, the Rocca de' Rossi. The similarity with the fate of Caterina Sforza was troubling, especially if you add the fact that Bianca Maria had been like a second mother to the younger Giovanni. He wasted no time. With the blessing of General Prospero Colonna, he crossed the Po and defeated the De Rossi in Buseto and put his little nephew back in power. After solving this family matter, he was then called to my own little Reggio Emilia, where the papal governor for the area, the aforementioned Francesco Guicciardini, needed some help sorting out the local brigands. There, Giovanni met a new frat buddy after Giovanni della Stufa, who we mentioned in the last episode. This time, it was one Pietro Aretino. Now he was quite a character, a writer, satirist, unapologetic homosexual, and the producer of Renaissance pornography. What sort of influence would he have on Giovanni? We'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much for listening. A History of Italy is a Sentire Media podcast, created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and produced by my superb Patreon supporters, whom I would like to thank, starting with the second third of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level, and they are Gabriel S., Gunnar W., Ignazio, Il Valentino, Jane T., Jeff M., Jeffrey W., John W., Joni T., John J., Jordan C., Joshua G., Julia G., Justin E., Kelly, Kyle D., Laurie B., Old John in Milwaukee, Mark P., and Michus Porchus. And of course, we cannot forget the tippy-top level Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri, and they are Lisa K., Peter W., David L., David C., Sen, David A., Karen D., Bridget T., Dallas R., Joseph V., Stephen G., and Julian. If, like them, you would like to have access to extra content and ad-free episodes, you can also become a Patreon supporter by going to ahistoryofitaly.com, clicking through to the support page and becoming a Patreon. Soon I'll be posting a special episode in collaboration with other two podcasters only on Patreon. On the support page, you can also make a one-time donation to PayPal or TP. Thank you very much if you do so. Please also don't hesitate to get in touch. Remember, I've launched the call for contributions if you would like to be a part of the 200th 8th anniversary episode. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com or on social media, and they are Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci.